Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second session of Bhutan Dialogues. It is an honor for Thimphu Park to be hosting this session. My name is Gyeltshen. I am the Chief Project Manager for the Electronic Patient Information System, a digital curriculum flagship programs project to digitize the entire healthcare services in the country for the Ministry of Health. Our theme for today is the role of technology in building transparency and accountability. There are countless cutting-edge technologies making headlines as we speak. Blockchain, conversational AI, augmented reality, metaverse, quantum computing, and of course, very recently, rapid virus testing, of course, thanks to COVID. However, using technology only for the sake of technology is a dangerous pursuit. And rather, we should be unlocking the power of technology to further its cause and to break down the barriers to human progress. So, before chasing the newest technology tool or the innovative new technology everyone is talking about, we should ask ourselves, does it solve the problem? To answer that question, we have Mr. Ujjwal Deep Dahal. He completed his Fulbright Humphrey Scholarship Fellowship Program in Technology Policy Management from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has an executive MBA from the Congress School of Business and Technology and an MSc in Electrical Engineering from the University of Oxford. He is currently the Director of the Innotech Department at the Two Holdings and Investments. And our host, we have Mr. Ngawang Gyeltshen. He is the founder and the CEO of Bhutan Food, one young World Peace Ambassador, European Development Day's Young Leader 2022, and he is a member of Lodin's Board of Trustees. Now, some house rules. I would like to request everyone to keep your phones silent or switch off, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the meeting, at the end of the panel. So please keep your questions as concise as possible in the interest of allowing more questions to the panel. And those who are participating online, you may drop your questions in the chat box. The team will compile the questions and will read them out during the Q&A session. The floor is yours.
Thank you, La. First of all, I would like to begin by thanking the venue partner for today, Thimphu Park. What better way to discuss the topic at hand, the fundamental role technology plays in accountability and transparency. And for that, I would also like to thank Mr. Ujjwal for making time and accepting our invitation to come and discuss with us about this topic. As you all might be aware, Mr. Ujjwal is one of the thought leaders in technology in Bhutan right now. So without further ado, can we begin by perhaps discussing what do we mean by transparency? What do we mean by accountability? And then we can start our discussion on what role technology plays on that.
Right. Thank you, Ngawang, and thank you, Tech Park, for hosting it. Of course, the right place to have this discussion. Again, thanks to Lodin Foundation for organizing this. Honestly, from technology side, I always feel technology is always the easier part, right? So I think it's important to reflect on transparency and accountability, yes. Because at the end of the day, the way I see things is technology is a tool. We can use the tool the way we want, but the fundamentals of being human, I think, is important. And I mentioned this more from the perspective of, because we're talking about transparency and accountability. And especially very important in this age when we talk about AI, right? So AI in a very simple form, automated machines, which does the job for us. It could be as a toaster at home, which can be controlled through your mobile, sitting far away, or whatever else. But how do we discipline ourselves that we use technology in the right way? I think that's important, and that's where transparency and accountability comes in. And I do want to bring in another third angle to it. I think trust. And I feel I don't want to get into the classical definition of transparency and accountability and stuff, but I think what is the definition of transparency? And I want us to quo and think from, from an individual level. What does transparency and accountability mean for us as individuals is important. As a family, what is transparency accountability for us? Maybe then we can even think of transparency and accountability from, organization perspective. Like we work for our own organizations. So individual, family, organization, nation, and I think as civilization, what is transparency and accountability for us? I think that's important to reflect. And transparency may be as simple as sharing information.
Yes.
At some stages, then we get into the aspect of, is sharing all information all about transparency? Maybe not, because it really depends on situation, right? So I think there is an interesting link between transparency to accountability. It does enable accountability, both the transparency part. Of course, it depends on how we define it at different levels. But then eventually both transparency and accountability, I think, builds that trust, right? And which is important, whether then we use technology to leverage that, to build our systems in societies, or how we build solutions to our problems we face. I think these two really forms the backdrop and rightly the right discussion to have at this point.
Very interesting. So you're defining different tiers of technology and its role for accountability and transparency comes in. So you have the very basic tier, which is the individual level, but then at the same time at the organizational level. But for the uninitiated, I guess it would really help us, for example, if you could give real-life examples of when technology has contributed positively to transparency and accountability, or perhaps negatively to the two elements.
Right. So let's talk the positives first. Right?
Okay.
Anyway, so let's look at some kind of an example. Let's for example look at our banking system.
Okay.
Right? I think we all know, most of us know how the ledger in the banking system was kept 20 years ago or 50 years ago, or when the whole system of accounting started. I think it's interesting to see how the ledgers were kept. Now, in a way, how transparent were the ledgers? It was kept by an individual, maybe in a village, if we can go back to that level, or if we look at today the banking system, the way it has evolved, it's kept in central servers, right? Now, how many people can actually tap onto the central server to change the ledger? That's where probably just quick peek into blockchain, it kind of helps, right? So technology helps in building transparency. But even if you look at generally, if you look at banking system, how it has evolved and what has that done to trust in terms of ensuring finances are raised nationally and internationally to finance the most important projects of education to technology development. We can go back and look at how the banking system developed, which gave confidence to investors, to people, to actually build, raise money to build systems, safely keep our money in the banks, because the transparency has increased there. So I think that's an interesting way to probably look at how transparency and accountability, kind of has played a role in developing societies. The other quick thing as a continuity I do want to mention also is in terms of the same banking system now looking at CBDCs, right? I mean, if you look at central bank digital currencies that we talk about, how can technology help CBDCs evolve? And again, there may be the negative part and the positive part, depending on how it evolves, right? I mean, we have seen digital dollars, digital yuan, and we are also talking about digital neutral CBDCs, which is backed by a general open public ledger, right? Which is basically a blockchain at the end. So technology helps in that, but at the same time, we cannot not talk about privacy when we talk about transparency and accountability. Now, the point is, how does CBDC evolve in terms of accounting every individual's spending habits that, because of technology, can be monitored and accounted? Does bring in ethical questions, does bring in how we want to evolve, and probably the reason why CBDCs are still more of a policy level thoughts, because technology can actually design CBDCs, if you really see at this point, right?
I see that. Very interesting, because one of the questions, or let's say one of the confusions I usually come across when I'm trying to explain, for example, use cases for blockchain, is this confusion with what digital cash is and how it is different from, say, sending money from one person to another using MBOP or MPay. So that's usually where the confusion lies, and I guess there's a bit of clarity when you say that for example, the central bank digital currencies actually have, it's very different from the normal, banking transfers that we do. Would you like to perhaps highlight a little bit on that? I mean, we don't want to get too much in crypto, because usually when people discuss blockchain, they go into cryptos, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think you rightly mentioned, the digitization of the ledger in a central server is what we do every day. What the MBOB or MPay or whatever we use, the same ledger is digitized in a central server. So that's what digital cash, if I may say, right, in a way. I don't know if that's the exact term. But if you look at CBDCs, the only aspect is it's decentralized. It is in not in one or two nodes, which possibly theoretically can be changed by a couple of individuals at the end of the day. Of course, we have policies and regulations that cannot be done, but technically it can be done. Whereas CBDCs, if put on a public ledger, then of course changing that with, 500 nodes or whatever blockchain that it is built in, changing that simultaneously at that point in time and a timestamp is theoretically impossible with the present computing that we have. So that's what is CBDC different. But it's still controlled. It is still controlled by the central banks, the CBDCs, right? Unlike the cryptos, which is peer-to-peer, of course.
So the two main themes that I'm getting from your points is basically the role legislation plays in and sort of like right now, at least it's at this stage where it's trying to catch up with the immense exponential growth of technology. That's one thing. And then another aspect that I'm hearing is obviously the role privacy plays. So in a world in pursuit of transparency, so to speak. So while, I mean, one of the news that's making headlines these days, at least in Bhutan, is the National Digital Identity Project, and how this massive collection of data, of biometric data, is happening and is due to be finished in a couple of months. So I really wanted to know if you could tell us more about it for people who are not aware about what it means and what it means for Bhutan.
Right. So it's one of the Digital Drupal flagship projects that DHI is working on. We have a team of about 15 of us who is working on the National Digital ID project with a lot of collaboration nationally and internationally. And I say it's a flagship because we will also be probably the first sovereign government in the world to have built digital identity on self-sovereign framework.
Yes.
So I do want to talk a little bit about self-sovereign framework in a way. And when we say self-sovereign identity, means the identity belongs to it belongs to me, right? So what's my identity? It's generally given at birth. So what's your foundational identity? The state has to give us a foundational identity, which in a way is either our birth certificate or our the national identity card. So these certificates or the identity cards that each nation give it to their citizens are generally then used for transaction. Right? I use my ID card or my passport that is given to travel. I use my ID card to give it to a bank to potentially recognize myself as a due citizen, and I get my loan, for example, right? And there are 101 use cases of my foundational ID, and all the other, now if I may say, certificates that I get, I use that in my daily life. All we are doing with digital identity, I haven't not yet touching the sovereign part, but the digital identity, can I digitize that and in a way carry in my wallet, right? So that's the idea. Now, what is self-sovereign? Today, my identity, depending on the policies, can be used by anybody. My ID card can be used. Of course, we may have some regulations and policy that it should only be used for a certain purpose and you cannot misuse it and all that, but it can still be used by somebody, right? Now, as a nation, do we want to evolve with the technology providing the backdrop, right? In a way, do we want to evolve where each one of us are in complete control of our data, of our, let me put it, identity, whether it is a certificate of foundation ID, or it's my tax certificate or anything. So if you look at it, how will this work? In a way, is kind of my wallet, right? So this same wallet, in a way, will, and I have a lot of cards inside my wallet. Not so much actually, but we don't use it already. We're kind of quite digital, right? But we have so many cards in our wallet, whether it's my ID card or my BOB or a BNB card, which I use. Now, can I transfer that digital certificates in my phone? And this is exactly what we are building, actually, right? So next year, all of us actually would have downloaded the National Digital Identity app.
Yes.
We will be able to authenticate ourselves completely online without visiting a counter.
Yeah.
Again, thanks to some of the evolution and technology, right?
Yes.
Whether it's the AI face matching systems or whatever we are going to use. And then eventually we will get a certificate or a verified credential. That's what it is called, right?
Yes.
And then I can use that certificate from my digital wallet to give it to, for example, BOB or Trustship Bank or BNB, and get myself authenticated and verified online. And it has full trust that the bank does not need me physically in front with my A4 size printed ID card, because of the way it is being designed, and also that the database would be in a blockchain. So that gives the trust and immutability for the systems to use the national digital. I hope I did not divulge too much into the details.
Very interesting, because the first thing that comes to my mind when you explained self-sovereign identity and this massive collection of biometric data, there will be, I guess, 3 sections of Bhutanese people when they first hear about this. The first one will be a section of people who would be least bothered. There will be one section who's thinking about, okay, like what can I do? Like what are some of the use cases? What can I contribute in terms of usage or functionality of that collection of data? So I'm thinking a set of entrepreneurs already thinking, okay, what sort of business can I create using this model? But there will be another section of Bhutanese people, but albeit a very small section, because the trust that Bhutanese people at least have for our government is very strong. But then you have, people around the world who don't really trust their government, and rightfully so in various parts of the world. Now, if something like this were to happen in such a country, there will be a group of people who will try to be worried, who will be worried about this, who will try to perhaps resist even. And at least in Bhutan, for example, PRC gets a lot of heat for trying to for being a police state or trying to be a police state. So what answers, or what are your thoughts on such concerns? Like, is it a concern?
In fact, I would say the self-sovereign ID framework or the architecture makes every individual empowered to share the data the way we want. So in fact, we own the data. Now, when I say that, of course, we are all social animals. We need to live in a society. I need to go and walk on the road or drive a car, get my license, go to a bank, get my money. So I cannot do anything with my data if it's just with me. So I think it's important. Now, at this point, okay, let's take a step back. Now everything is getting digital. But what's the guarantee that the person 20 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers away who is online is the person he or she claims to be today? When the internet started, internet protocol or the internet layer was never built for identification, right? It was never. We can never recognize 100% online person, online identity on the internet. But the SSI and actually provides that opportunity. So SSI is actually hailed as the next potential technology such as the internet. I cannot validate that yet. Let's see how it evolves. But some reports do talk about it from that, because it gives you a possibility to 100% identify somebody on the web. Right. So that's important. But so hopefully that will give an insight to us in terms of how individuals can control their data. But as I said, I have to share my identity card, which is in my wallet now, to you for me to get a service from you.
Yes.
We can never do away with that, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, when my identity card was given to me by my government, or my tax certificate was given to me by my government, the government still has that data with them, right? Or any other organization for that matter still has that data. So the point is, how does the other two parties don't talk to each other regarding my data is not something that technology can solve. Yes. That is something we need to evolve in our policies and regulations, right?
I see.
And it also builds the character of a society or a nation, how we evolve that regulation of sharing the data between the two parties.
Yes.
And let individuals be the owner of their data and let them use it the way they want.
Yes.
And that's all about self-sovereign. That's the definition of self-sovereign,
Yes.
right? At the
Yes.
end of the day, right?
Every time I go to or I avail a public service, right, getting my passport or getting a new passport, or going for license renewal or anything, I wish there was a opportunity for me to comment, perhaps not criticize, but at least share suggestions on how that particular service could have been improved. And I always wish there was this platform where we could do that. But one concern that I had was, okay, how do you stop people from making troll accounts or fake accounts and then submitting ideas or comments that are completely useless? So with self-sovereign identity, am I right to think that I would be able to do that, and then that system would be able to verify I'm a real person, like not necessarily give my details, but verify that this is a real Bhutanese citizen giving opinion? Will that be one of the use cases?
Theoretically, yes.
Yes.
But do we want to do that is a question, right?
Yes.
I mean, like, I want that individual to be identified if he or she wants $1 million loan or a $1 million
Yes.
loan, right? But do I really want to use the technology? Theoretically, technologically, I would prima facie say what you said is possible.
Yes.
Because if you can identify every individual and build a character about that individual through, so that, if somebody writes a fake account, then I don't associate him or her to any of the identity that is there in the transaction. It's easy to identify that individual. So theoretically, yes, but do we want to is a question, right? So again, that's probably where we need to ensure technology is used in the best way. It serves the society to solve the right problems. I'm not saying this is a wrong problem. It is a problem, but personally, I feel that is a problem that we should grow more from character and how we grow as a society, rather than, in a way, if I may say, policing every individual. Then, of course, then we talk about infringing personal rights and infringing. So I think we need to look at that also. Well, it is theoretically possible. Should we do it? I still want to analyze it more, whether that's a good use case or not.
That's fair enough. But then, so we discussed a little bit about accountability when it comes to a government or a state when they're collecting data and what they do with said technology. But what about accountability of big tech? Just a few weeks ago, I was listening to the president of ORF, one of the leading think tanks in India, and he was talking about how small states where do not account in the algorithms of the big tech. So, for example, in Bhutan, a lot of social discourse happens on Facebook, and Facebook pretty much dominates, in terms of what happens in that social discourse, and has a huge power over a set social discourse. But are they accountable to us? So we're talking about accountability of the government to a group of to its citizens. But what about accountability of big tech? And what's your thought on Bhutan? I mean, and where we're heading in that space, ensuring accountability of big tech.
Interesting. Again, the way I look at things is regulate later, let the innovation happen, right? But I think it's also important to keep an eye on that, right? But coming from a very basic design engineering thought process and background, I do not want to regulate to kill innovation.
Yes.
Now, maybe some of the big techs, whether it's Google or Facebook or whatever, if there were too much regulations in the early 90s or whenever the whole, the push started for building something like this when they did not even see a potential of a business case, right? If Google was asked to give their business case to an investor, I don't know how the investor would have reacted.
Yep.
All right. So now, if you look at that and ask the same question, then we might want to see whether how are they responsible. Well, they have done something to solve a problem. Now, at the same time, if you go back to see how nuclear power is probably, was researched and used for certain purposes, but is also now used for energy, right? So I want to draw a parallel around both. Do not want to say completely that the big techs are not responsible or not accountable. Well, they actually have to be accountable now,
Yes.
right? But so my thoughts or answers or comments lie somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
That how do we find that sweet spot
Yes.
as a regulator, as a government, as society's individual behavior, that we don't let the big techs bully us, but at the same time also acknowledge that the big tech has also given so much of problem solving tools and tackles. The AI would have never reached this stage if it were not for some of the people who put money in this big tech.
Yes.
So I do want to look at both, but I'm not against what you mentioned.
Yes.
They have to be regulated.
Yes.
And hence, if you look at GDPR, if you look at the other
Yes.
other aspects of NIST and all that on security and all that, how they will probably evolve to regulate this big tech, not to kill innovation, but to ensure as societies we live with ethics and values and transparency and accountability. That is
Yes.
probably the theme of the talk, is managed. So it's a culmination of technology and policy and behavior as individuals, as societies actually.
Leslie, very interesting, because the reason why I mentioned that was because here in the first segment of the discussion or the talk, we talked about how government is accountable, and there will be a segment of people that are resisting, that might resist, I mean, or might be skeptic of such a collection. But then again, we are already willingly providing a lot of our data to these big tech. So and then the issue, the accountability place. But in terms of since we have already discussed about digital spaces and then the role of big tech on that, I am reminded of one thing His Majesty once mentioned, which is about how Bhutan must aspire to become a knowledge-creating society as opposed to a knowledge-consuming society. And what are your thoughts on that? For example, what is Bhutan doing right now for achieving that vision?
So I think knowledge-based economy is interesting for us to look at, definitely, right? In a way, because we have physical limitations at the end of the day, but we should not probably look at those as a limitations.
Okay.
Maybe there provides an opportunity. We have the two biggest markets actually next to each other, and we generally talk about physical limitations because we are landlocked. But at the same time, we have the biggest markets actually. We don't have to ship for 5,000 miles to reach our market. So maybe even the physical boundary can be looked at it more positively from two markets, which is there. But having said that, I think if you look at knowledge-based economy, I want to look at it more from the perspective of R&D. How much, for the question for us is, how much as a nation do we spend on research and development, right?
Yes.
So I think it's time for us to not be consumers, but to be developers, right?
Yes.
So and that is what is the first step towards building a knowledge-based economy that you mentioned. And I think it's important to build that platform, where we judiciously take risks in investing in research and development. Now, the research and development need not be the fancy breaking of atoms and stuff to begin with, right? So we don't need to jump there, because when we say about R&D, that's the perception we get generally, which is not. We can start with applied research. We can then eventually get into strategic fundamental research, right? And that's the part. But research itself is not enough at the end of the day. There's so much of knowledge already created by civilizations and societies. We have it archived around the world. We can use that, get into fundamentals at some point, and innovate on that knowledge, right? And this is what we is our philosophy in DHI Innotech department also.
Yes.
Use the knowledge, R&D, but innovate on it. When you innovate on that knowledge, then is when you create services and industries.
Yes.
It's very, and that's the cycle. And that service and industry is what feeds back to the R&D, right? So that's a circular, circular economy, if I may say, circular cycle that feeds into this perpetual machine we call, right? In a way. So I think this is the foundational, fundamental thought process we need to have in developing a knowledge-based society, and we need to definitely take risk in investing in R&D.
Yes.
Right. So that's one thing. The other quick thing I do want to mention about is also, all these sections of the society, whether it's the society itself, the academic body, the industry, and the government. Everyone has to come together to build this R&D platform. It cannot be just an individual. So if you look at Israel, if you look at Silicon Valley, how did they all come together to actually build that density of innovation? I think is important. So that's something, and I personally I see, and we all can see the transformation that's happening in our government, in our academia, in our industry, right, and in our society. If you can relate to each of the events and process that we are going through in our national transformation, I think it's a clear pathway that is being created for us to actually become a knowledge-based society, to create intellectual properties, right? If you look at global innovation index, vis-a-vis the GDP of countries. These are available online. So if you look at that, which are the countries which are very high on innovation index and also on the GDP? They are very, I think generally we can say they're very highly correlated, directly proportional, right? So yeah, those are some thoughts that I can share in terms of preparing ourselves to be a knowledge-based society. But I do feel that we are in the right track at this point.
I really like how you mentioned that it's not just about the fancy words. When we talk about R&D, it can be as simple as looking at the existing body of literature and seeing what we can do with it. That reminded me of something very funny, which is different departments in our government have they produce so many, for example, use cases, so many research papers, but sort of they get buried under the website. And for someone as an entrepreneur like me, it would have benefited me, for example, to have found or come across this research before I started a particular business. So we usually find out that we spend so much on research and it sort of gets buried. But I like how you said that it's not just about doing the R&D, but also about how you're going to innovate on it. So with that, I wanted to ask more about. So you mentioned that Bhutan should be investing in R&D and taking sort of risks. Would the Super Fab Lab be considered such a risk or such a investment?
Yes, and I would say with very minimal risk.
I think with very minimal, yes.
Because Super Fab Lab is just a couple of meters away from here, and it's a space that provides the opportunity to build things with hands. So generally, if you have an idea, 20 years ago, a kid would probably have an idea, maybe draw it on a paper, right? And then computers came in. Maybe we had open softwares. We downloaded that. We put those drawings in, I don't know, AutoCAD or Tinkercad or anything like that, whatever was available. Then you started seeing 2D on the computer. Then we had 3D softwares, and now with spaces like Super Fab Lab or Fab Labs, you can actually print those out, right, in 3D forms. Or and Super Fab Lab is not just for printing, of course. You can cut metals, you can design, you can print. So basically, every idea or imagination that we have as individuals, as innovators, as creative designers, we can go to the lab and actually make that work. So if I want to print this, actually you can, right? Depending on what material we print it out of. If I want to design a keyboard and you have a fundamentally different thought process in designing this keyboard, we can go to the Super Lab and print. So it is the platform that has been created in Bhutan, and of course on the vision and command of His Majesty himself. So yes, but this is the least risky investment that you would have made, with a huge, you may not see financial returns, but huge economic and social and innovation returns, whatever words we can coin, right? so that's what Super Fab Lab provides. And I wish and I hope that every individual, every innovator, and one disclaimer I do want to make is Super Fab Lab is not for technologists alone. Definitely not. This is how it is generally perceived or it's seen, because you see a lot of big machines.
Yes.
But it's for every walk of life. A poet or a writer or a creative designer all form a team to build things in Super Fab Lab. And this is a message I do want to pass through this forum,
Yes.
that Super Fab Lab is for every creative individual, every individual to try out something new or different or regular. Just enjoy also there. Yeah.
Yes. It's very interesting when we talk about the thin line between using it for good and then using it for nefarious means. So, for example, with 3D technology, I'm sure you're aware, it was started with such positive idea to bring, such a powerful technology to end consumer, and then some crazy American comes up with this idea to print a 3D gun. So, as a technologist yourself, how do you balance that? Should the creators of technology be aware of possible malicious implications of that said technology, or is it something that the regulators have to battle after the technology is developed?
It's an interesting, again, chicken and egg kind of question, right? But the use case is important.
Yes.
Should certain fundamental research be banned? Is a question that I want to ask everyone, actually, right? Do I have an answer? No, at this point, right? And but on the same note, anything can be dangerous, right? An AI program that can print a 3D gun that is designed here but prints 1,000 miles away because the person who wants to use it is there. All the 3D printers can be networked and done, and this is already being done, right? So and then you actually, the gun can actually move itself. Now, how do you, going back to the question I asked us, how do you perceive that kind of use case when you are developing a robot that can actually feed an elderly? It's the same algorithm which can actually feed the gun, right? So basically, the way I see it is, it boils down to how we evolve as civilization, right?
Yes.
What's our ethics? What's our background? How do we think as individuals? How do we think as societies? And so a lot of times we get so bogged down with technology, but we do not see the other aspect, the softer aspects of how do we evolve as humans, which is also as important, because you cannot regulate technology, you cannot regulate any fundamental research at the end. Whether you want to or not, the question I asked, still open for all of us to ponder upon, but you cannot regulate. You can for some time, but can we really? Probably not.
That's very interesting. I mean, Bhutan at this moment, at this very moment, is undergoing such transformation, and we've seen the tourism sector go through a transformation as well. And soon we are going to be introduced to the new brand, I believe. And I've done a lot of thinking on, okay, how do we brand ourselves, if not happiness? Like, what is our unique selling proposition? And I did not find an answer up until I came across a talk His Majesty gave, I think, at the RUB, where he mentions that in a world where skills and information is abundantly available, it's the values, the Bhutanese values, that will set us apart. And that's a very beautiful way to put it. And I think Loden has a very similar program that I think sort of like aligns with His Majesty's vision, which is the whole idea of the Bodhisattva entrepreneur. So as someone who is at the forefront of technological development in Bhutan, do you see values, values of what you said, like compassion, empathy? Do you see these values playing a very important role in setting Bhutan apart from entrepreneurs that are born in the Silicon Valley or in the IIT of India or in the the tech space in China?
I think this should be ethics and value in every entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
I think that's important, because, and can that be a unique selling proposition for us? Yes, I would say.
Yes.
And I say this with conviction, actually, in a way, because let's I think I've mentioned this before, but let's do a self-driving car, right? I mean, you drive, Will self-driving car come to the roads? Okay, that's a different question. Some are already there, but hypothetically, let's say there are billion self-driving cars talking to each other,
Yes.
right? And we know which company that would be, the big tech that we talked about, right? What kind of leverage that big tech will have and how we will regulate is another question beyond Google or Facebook today. Right?
Yes.
So a billion cars or 50 million cars talking to each other, and these cars are actually programmed by programmers. And what are their ethics? What is that corporation's or that company's ethics in programming? I mean, it's a very hypothetical scenario, but how will the car react to kill the driver itself or to hit a person on the road? Needs to be actually today as we drive, and our instinct things depending on either I brake, my brake is failed, I kill myself, go over the road, or hit the person on the road. How do I decide today? I don't have to. It's a luxury for us, right? Because it happens when it happens, right? But if it's a self-driving car, you need to actually program that. I know this situation may not happen every time, but it's a hypothetical one. But you need to program that. Right? Now, can values and ethics that we talked about, the compassion, the empathy, work in solving this problem? I don't think directly, but in this particular situation, but this is a very, very probably 0.001%, but it still can happen. Would you want to buy a car that would kill oneself? I would probably never go to that car manufacturer, right?
Yes.
But would you also want to buy a car that would save yourself but hit the other person on the road, right? So it brings in a lot of ethical dilemma and dimensions to think about.
Yes.
And hence, I would say, with our culture, with our values, how do we transfer that with our GNH in action in the government? Probably a good way to see is how can that bring in ethics in AI or ethics in machine learning eventually would be a very interesting dimension for our USP.
Yes. Thank you so much. Very interesting points. I believe we will open up the floor to questions from the audience. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So basically, when we are talking about the use of technology to enhance or to further the topics of transparency and accountability and all these things, not only in transparency and accountability, but for anything like from looking at the history of technologies and the use of technology to actually for the technology to become useful to the society. It looks like legislation is always kind of behind technology. So like how do you see the scenario in Bhutan? Is the legislation, is it up to the mark so that we can actually use the technology for the good of society, or is it really behind that by the time the legislation catches up, the technology is gone, the usefulness of the technology is gone?
Is the legislation behind technology, right? And so that's and should it be ahead actually? As an engineer, as an innovator, I would always want the legislation to be, the regulation, if I may say rather, to be a little bit behind. But very cognizant, very important also is that it's not misused, of course, right? So, but then practically and actually, what it should be is it should be hand in hand, right? So that's very important because the legislatures, the people who make the government policies and regulations should be part of the team which develops the technology, right? So that we can understand each other. And actually, this is something we are doing in National Digital Identity project, and I really like this model. And this is also the first time with the support from the government we are building NDI, and we have a big team, and even the self-sovereign ID frameworks, regulations, and act is being drafted by the technologies, including the policymakers together, right? So as much as I say that individual innovators, I'm sure will be doing their own work at the underground, back-end, backyards, right? So the regulators have to keep an eye what's happening on the tech space. How will CBDC change the monetary system? I don't think any central bank was a part of when the blockchain was used for building CBDCs, right? But there will be situations where you need to catch up, and I always feel that regulators will always be behind innovators. But on certain strategic things like whether in Bhutan, the context in Bhutan is interesting because the NDI, I think we are building it together. For example, we are doing the drone project, and we would want the regulators together with us at the Super Fab Lab as we fabricate the drone to work on the regulations of how the drone regulation in Bhutan should improve and evolve. And I think that's the best way to go forward. But at the end of the day, I think regulators will always be a step behind from the innovators, because I think that's probably the law of nature. I don't know. Right?
Yes.
How would you see right now we use passwords, and we use passwords and special codes, and we use special questions to answer security questions in regards to our data. And how would the SSI process be any different from that? I mean, how would you encrypt or certify a piece of information that is going to some destination without the risk of someone else getting a hold of that? I mean, if it's digital, it's digital. If it's ones and zeros, it's ones and zeros. It can't be anything but that. So that would mean to me that data would be perhaps a little more secure, but I mean that again just means more security in terms of passwords. And now we're going through reams of passwords. We all of us have unlimited numbers of passwords, and it's getting a bit ridiculous. Is there some other fundamental way that we could ensure information got transferred successfully, and then going back to your original comment of ensuring that whoever receives that data is certain that it is our data? That's the kicker to the whole thing. How do we do that?
So if you look at today, your Gmail account is verified, and we trust you. It may be somebody else impersonating as Steve and writing to me. I have no way to know if he has or she has a hold of your password, right? So that's kind of a centralized identity given by Google or Facebook or whatever. So we use that identity here and there, but are they foolproof? No. And I need to maintain my Google password, I need to maintain my Facebook password and X number of passwords. So that's the centralized ID. Government gives us ID, it's still centralized, right? So that's the first generation of identity. The second generation of identity, which we are experiencing today, is I can use my Google account to actually log into application ABCD. Right? Log in using Google or log in using Facebook, because that application has started trusting Google or Facebook, who has identified Steve. Right? So that's kind of from the centralized to kind of federated. What we are talking about, self-sovereign, is you will have the certificate which will be trusted by anybody in the world. Well, this has not happened yet. We're trying to do that. Technology allows us to do that. So basically, with your certificate in your phone, a verified credential as we say, you should be able to log into any of the applications. So no more passwords, no more logins for each of this. But how will my digital identity, which I'm building, we are building it on blockchain through a SSI forum, will be able to log into Google or Facebook? Well, after we build it, we need to start talking to them to use us as a part of it. Because next year when we build, you'll be able to log into MBOB without remembering your password or thing, because BOB will trust the NDI that we build, or Tashi Bank will trust the NDI we build, and the verified credential that you are Steve, which is given by the foundational ID creator in Bhutan. So the point I'm trying to make is, with the decentralized ID, because it promises that every individual can be recognized 100% online. So rather than using Google or Facebook identity to log into application ABCD, I should be able to use my decentralized ID, which I have. And if every 7 billion people in the world have that, then we don't need to have any login and password, and then hence the internet will have identity layer actually. Right? So that's how it is.
As you were sharing, I just quickly jump in. As you were sharing about the difference between SSI and what's currently happening, and it just occurred to me. So, for example, the Twitter deal right now, which was stalled because they have a huge number of anonymous accounts.
Right.
Do you foresee in the near future, after a successful development of an SSI by a sovereign government, that sovereign government I mean, what you're talking about, cross-platform access to various apps, for example, that would require two systems talking to each other. So do you think a government would possibly monetize that? So for example, because then it helps that private company's valuation, because it can confidently say that all the users in my platform are real, they're not bots. And they can do that because of the SSI system that a sovereign nation has built. So do you see a government perhaps monetizing it?
I mean, the identity system can be monetized. It is monetized today also, yes, right? So it will be monetized. But whether it will be the government, I don't see the government running the identity system, right? So it will be, should be the companies, because the attributes of my data, which I get as verified credential, certain attributes cannot be held by individuals or corporations, for that matter. It's better to be with the government, right? So that also, to go back to your point of data collection, which is being done by the government, will be with the government. We will never have that data with NDI.
I see.
Right? And even individuals, every individual will have only your data. So if 700,000 of us needs to be hacked, every individual's mobile needs to be hacked. So that's so much more difficult, actually, because it's decentralized, right? So to come back to your question, I think monetization, the way I see happening, will happen, but the monetization will happen from the perspective of solving the inefficiencies in non-digital transactions.
I see.
Right? I mean, if tomorrow, for a simple example, if tomorrow Tasha Bank or BNB or BOB is able to onboard me and give me a loan without pushing one paper, well, a lot of money will be saved there, which then, of course, that can be paid to sustain the digital identity platform, right? So that's how probably.
Very interesting. I believe you have some questions from the audience. So, Pema?
We have a couple of questions from our online viewers. Our first question is, how can we encourage organizations to fully digitize their business processes if basic tech services like national internet banking are also susceptible to system failure? And our follow-up question is, how ready is Bhutan to protect itself from data breaches and server attacks?
Taking the second question first, is how ready are we from cyber attacks? We can only be so much ready because we can secure our house with double glazed windows to everything, but there can always be an attack. Right? So it's cyberspace is no different, to be honest. And again, I think what Kinley asked about regulators and innovators, the cyber attackers and the innovators are also in a run against each other. Right?
Yes.
So who is earlier is also a question there. So I think once we are online, we can never be 100% secure. But the way I see it is, as we evolve, the idea of security changes, right? I think that's important. What was security 50 years ago is no more a concern for me, actually, right? Certain fundamental things don't change, but many a times the security definition will change. But not to divert away from the reality, is our cyber secure systems one of the top in the world? Of course, it's a no. Are we working on it? Yes. The government, the ITT and the government is working on it. We are, from DHI side, we are playing a small part in strengthening our security. Of course, I'll not get into the details of what is being done and all that stuff. But just to give us the confidence, as we build our society more digital, I think it's important to look at the security vertical. And we are working on it. That's what I can mention. The second question was, how do we encourage digitization in the companies when internet is
the interbanking system,
interbanking and internet is sketchy? I think if again, I don't want to dodge the question. I think we all know our internet is sketchy, but again, I do want to give us a perspective that again, let's look at it 10 years ago and today, and let's not only look at the progress, but let's look at the rate of progress, right? And those are important aspects to look at. And am I hopeful that this will be better? Yes. And I'll give certain statistics, right? Not statistics, certain examples. We have optical fiber dropping into every GAWOC, 205 GAWOCs. Not many countries have that. Are we using the optical fibers that we dropped about 10 years ago to every GAWOC optimally? No. Are we working on it? We are, but maybe we should work a little bit better in terms of building a business model around it. So that's one thing that gives me confidence to say that we should digitize, and we are in the right track. The other thing is we have 2G, 3G, 4G. We have even launched 5G. Has it been very useful? We all know the answers, right? But how do we make it useful? But the important part is we are in that journey. It's there. But it's all of our responsibility. How do we build that network? What are the competition? What are the threats? Or are the opportunities? What happens when SpaceX mobile internet is available? How do we pivot our business model of our telecom industry? Important thing to think about. But as a consumer and as a platform for digitalization or digitization to grow, do we have enough? I would say yes. But are we doing enough? We need to move a little faster. Probably I'll mention that.
Yes. Do you have any other questions from the audience? I mean, online audience?
How can we ensure inclusivity of individuals who might not be as tech savvy within the system where all business or government procedures are digitized?
Important question, right? I think the most important thing about humans are we are very adaptable, and I think we learn. So, and this is a major aspect about any product, service, technology to bring it to market. A lot of things don't come to market or don't survive, even though they solve the right problem, is because of adoption, right? So how do we ensure as entrepreneurs that the product we feel that we build to digitize solves the problem? First of as an entrepreneur, I am sure you'll agree, is you're solving a problem at the end of the day. Are you solving the right problem? Are we solving the problem in the right way? If we are confident on that, we also need to ensure that the message goes out in terms of rollout, that it is adopted. And we do discuss this in our project for National Digital Identity. We may talk about smartphones, but how many of us use our smartphones? Things like that will come. And it's all about advocacy. It's all about, as much as, going down to the level and in helping every individual. I mean, we see, and this is not only a problem with digitization. We see people coming to the bank and asking us to fill up a form because they want to withdraw their 2,000 Neutrum, right? And I myself have helped so many people write the form and thing. So it's very similar. We have gone through that, and now with the digitization, we need to ensure that it's adopted by everybody, and we make it easier. And it's not something that will happen overnight. And when we need to work on it.
Just another question. What about the feasibility of using biometrics more extensively, voice recognition and other types? We have cameras on our phones. We can easily identify fingerprints. Maybe use more complex forms of identification to verify that data so that it's more secure. And the second question I'd like to ask you about is, what is your feeling or your perspective on the idea of a parallel intranet nationally? And that way it leaves us, if there is an internet issue or a risk, potential exposure risk, we can mitigate that to some extent by having a national intranet, which could be just as effective in terms of transactions, and then will not expose us to nefarious or various activities.
Thanks, Steve. I think the first question on biometrics and algorithms, that's a part of the NDI project. So we will be extensively using some of the latest facial recognition algorithms to actually remotely identify all of us. So the biometrics will be face, we can use iris, we can use fingerprints. So we are working on all of that to ensure that when tomorrow you download the app and then you self-register on your phone through the things, at the back end, your face will be running through your profile that's in the database with the government, right? So we are doing that. So that gives us the confidence that it is Steve who is trying to say he is Steve. So that is being planned and it being developed with partners. On the parallel intranet, I think it all boils down to cost. That's how I see it, and I've had discussions with my colleague. It's about like if I can build a huge cache memory in Bhutan Telecom server, I don't need to use my international bandwidth every time I Google the same, or some of us Google the same thing. Now it comes down to cost. How much cache can I have in Bhutan, or how many, some of the international servers I could have in Bhutan. Then my international bandwidth, which is one of the most expensive part, is curtailed or limited, right? So that's one way I see. But I agree with the intranet. There's also internet, educational internet. I forget the name. Second layer. Do you remember the name?
No.
In Europe, they have the second layer in internet, which is only used by educational institutes.
The one in Bhutan?
We also have in
One
Drukren,
Drukren, yes.
So we could do that, and that's probably some of the ideas we should ponder upon. Whether it'll be actually better to host our own servers for school curriculum, the textbooks that can be in an internal server. Then every individual kid tomorrow can actually connect to that server. If all of us have the device, I think 170,000 students every year. If they have a mobile phone, then they can connect to this intranet server where all the books are there. It's an interesting thought idea. We have discussed also, but again, it boils down to which is more cost effective actually at the end. Right?
Lasla, I think we are 2 minutes past our allocated time, but we have one question, so we'll take one. Okay.
Regarding the responsible AI, so how we are going to tackle that AI applications or projects that if we have to build here in Bhutan, and do we have a concrete framework like Microsoft? If I give an example, Microsoft has its own principle, responsible AI, 4 key principles, and Facebook has its own 5 key principles, and then even Google has. And when we use their applications, there are certain the things to check off, like to set up, to fulfill the response, the features, so that we can use their applications. So, Bhutan also, and relate to the NGI project also. So, how we are going to make the framework for being a responsible AI, and then how we can develop that framework. And then next is like, when we come to the NDI project, like in the future, that the data that we get from that project, how we are going, if we have to use it for the AI project, so how it is going to like make a framework for that. So, and if I have a startup, if I have a startup company, and how they start, and I want to do the AI project, so how the policy makers are going to, like, do we have right now a policy that to do the project, or we can just go without any rules, protocols, or like that. So my question is like, how the policy makers are reach to that level.
Right. Thanks, Nanda. I think the question is important and pertinent. How do we evolve policy? Again, comes back to the idea of regulators and technologists and innovators, right? Do we have a framework? There are bits and pieces of it around. Do we have a concrete framework at this point? No. Are we working or proposing towards it? I would say yes. And from DHI Innotech also, we are a proponent of it. That we need to have a framework of how how we consume AI responsibly. A lot of times we may feel that it's too early for us to even care about it, right? But maybe we can probably think about it. So your question is pertinent, and it's important to build a framework of how AI will develop. I think that's comprehensive. Test ban treaty came in after nuclear innovation, right? Fusion, of course. Fission, of course. I wish it was fusion. So important. But in terms of the other question was on NDI and data, right? NDI, actually, the way it is being done today with self-sovereign, NDI has no data centrally. It's still with the responsible agencies of the government. We are just consuming that data. That's why you see a lot of data collection that's happening to strengthen that database. all we are doing is, tomorrow you will be giving your selfie, we'll be comparing your selfie to what has been in the census database, and those will be compared, and I know that it's you, right? So, but of course, having said that, there will be some data level at some point. How do we plan to use that? I think we can keep discussing, and it's a huge opportunity in data economy itself, and how do we leverage a data economy is something that I think all of us should look at and build a data economy. As much as we talk about knowledge economy, I think the data economy enforces that knowledge economy, right? So how do we manage our data? How do we build our data? And our data is very unique. We have data from 300 meters to 5,000 meters, and not many countries has the privilege of providing data at those altitudes within a short span of drive. So that's why I'm a big proponent, of course, of data economy. And you can look at it from usage of drones, testing of drones for that particular diversity we have, or for that matter, all the X-rays we have. We are very unique individuals here in a very unique situation. So that would be very interesting for a medical AI learning algorithm in radiology. Are we using that data? No. Should we? Yes. Should we develop the framework? I think we should all work together to do that.
Las, thank you so much. I think this is the end of the discussion today. Again, I would like to thank the venue partner and all the partners for making this possible, and for our speaker for taking the precious time. Las, thank you so much.
Thank you.